I'm going to pass the microphone to our moderator, Brad Rourke, who will introduce the panelists in a moment. But Brad is a leader at the Kettering Foundation. He's the Chief External Affairs Officer and Director of DC Operations. As a member of the senior management team, he leads the Foundation's Washington office, heading efforts to amplify the Foundation's impact and reputation across key audiences. Brad's work sits at the intersection of government, politics, public affairs, ethics, journalism, and democratic participation. In addition to his Kettering activities, he actively raises awareness through key issues through his op-eds, essays, blogs, and videos, and I appreciate his voice in our field. He also holds multiple leadership roles in organizations that I know I care about and appreciate the work, specifically PACE, Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, and the National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberation. Thank you, Brad, for moderating.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the panelists. Congratulations to all the awardees, especially, but not exclusively, the University of Dayton, for reasons that will become apparent in a moment. So honored to be here on behalf of the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. For those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan operating foundation that focuses on advancing and defending inclusive democracy. We are based in Dayton, Ohio, so hence my pride, and have a growing office in Washington, D.C. I can't think of a better set of admonishments than Paul gave us when it comes to democracy and the role of higher education. Show up, pay attention, and do the work. And we're going to try to draw a line through all of those in our brief panel today. Higher education, as you know, has long been a space where democratic engagement, activism, civic responsibility all intersect. Never has it been without its challenges, especially now. But exclusion and inequity have shaped the institutions and opportunities within higher education. The goal now is not to return to a flawed past, as you know, but to strengthen higher education's role in advancing democracy. And as polarization grows, as political pressures mount, debates over academic freedom, access intensify, how should higher education respond to this moment, and what current realities and untapped potential of student activism and leadership exist in shaping democracy's future? We're gonna follow a journey here. I promise you, I'm not gonna ask the same question of each panelist every time, but we are gonna start with that, and I'll introduce each briefly as they come up. David Pepper, at my far left, maybe that's true, is Kettering Foundation Senior Fellow. We're proud to have him. He's a lawyer, writer, political activist, adjunct professor, former elected official, and former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party from 2015 to 2021. He teaches election and voting rights law as an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. And he is author of books to which I commend you: Laboratories of Autocracy, A Wake-Up Call from Behind the Lines, and Saving Democracy, A User's Manual for Every American. David, what are you seeing? What moment are we in?
Well, as Brad, when you mentioned that was going to be our first question back there, my first worry was, well, I'm going to just have to spend 5 or 10 minutes being really depressing about what I see. We see some real challenges to our democracy that we're going to talk about. But that's why I'm so glad I got to hear about the award winners in some of the speeches before I came up. Because what I also see is higher ed, independent colleges and universities serving as a massive bulwark for democracy. And I hope that this group today, the whole week, some of the words from the president, some of the words from our speakers can turn this week into all of us seeing a real sort of movement to protect democracy. And I think that's the higher ed, independent education is a key part of the infrastructure of a healthy democracy. Some people know that, and they don't like it. We all know it, and we need to live it, and we need to build from it. And we'll talk about that today, but I want to just say something broader that people who spoke, and I love what you said, that you're doing the work not in spite of the moment, but because of the moment. The work is more important now than ever because of it. And one thing that I like to talk about beyond education is just, you all know this better than me because of what you teach and what you do, but a lot of Americans think that somehow we're uniquely in a bad spot right now. It's worse for us than anyone that's ever been. That's not our history, and we know it. We have been in a battle for democracy since our founding. It goes back and forth. And the inspiration I get is knowing that people fought for it and protected it, including your colleagues in the past, facing more than we face right now. And they got through it. And they fought because of the challenges, not in spite of it. And I think that's what we have to think about now, that we've been through this over the centuries. It's always been a struggle. No, we were not the first generation in American history that didn't have to worry about democracy. If we thought we were, well, we figured out we were wrong. And as we sit MLK was mentioned, and the Carters were mentioned. I can open my phone here. Hold on. What is going on? I want to read a quote from another great champion who also Georgia became his home, and that's John Lewis. There's a new book that came out about a year ago that I found great inspiration. It was the same author who wrote at great length about the freedom rides. And I feel this at this moment, and I hope when we're done today and with this whole conference, we all feel this. I feel it. I think the tough times give our work more meaning than maybe we ever believed. We're not just struggling over small things. We are in the long-term battle of democracy. Here's what John Lewis said about what he called the spirit of history that drove him to do what he did every day. And we all must feel this now. At certain points in life, in the flow of human existence and circumstances, this force, what he called the spirit of history, finds you or selects you. It chases you down, and you have no choice. You just allow yourself to be used, to be guided by this force, and to carry out what must be done. And my hope is that all of us, and the reason I'm excited is the power in this room of your institutions and your networks and your students and your alumni groups is enormous. It could change the country. And if all of us leave with the spirit that I just read, the difference this room and the people here this week can make is absolutely enormous. So that's what I'm seeing right now, Brad. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, come on. David said he was gonna start negative, but that doesn't feel at all. Let's jump over to Rashawn Davis, Executive Director of the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Andrew Goodman was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan trying to register black citizens to vote during the Freedom Summer of 1964, and the foundation that now bears his name harnesses his legacy to grow new leaders who are bitten by the spirit of activism, like Andy was. Rashawn, as former director of racial justice labs at change.org, spearheaded the investment of millions of dollars into black and brown leaders driving impactful racial justice work, including Newark's Historic Police Review Board. In 2014, he became one of the youngest people in the history of Newark to be certified and appear on a municipal election ballot at the age of 21. You don't look much older than that. Now, Rashawn, what are you paying attention to?
Well, it's good to see everybody, and it's good to be here, and it's very tough to follow you, David. But
You're welcome.
I think, you named a lot of it, right? I think what I'm seeing out here when I'm talking to young people especially is, quite frankly, a lot of fear. And I think the big thing that has come to my mind, particularly over the past few months, is I think for a lot of us who aren't in this room, there's this theory out there that young people are apathetic. How many folks have heard that? And I think all of us here can say that that probably isn't true, that young people are more involved today than we've seen in recent history, that young people have this deep desire and yearning for action, but they're looking for support to do that. And so what I'm seeing out there, right, is young people who are motivated by the moment, who are ready to get involved. And the question now is, how do we create the space and the resources to support them?
Thank you. Say more about the moment.
Yeah.
What moment are we in?
Well, I think you hit the hammer on the nail. I think this is a moment of opportunity. There's a lot of chaos out there, but I think in chaos there is opportunity. And so, you know, and I want to be careful about how I phrase this, but democracy is the big thing that we're talking about. And if you're someone who looks like me, the reality is our democracy actually never worked for folks who look like me. And so the thing that we are trying to save is something, as you said, David, since the founding of this country has not worked for many, many generations of people. And I think the question before us now, in this moment of chaos, is really a moment of opportunity. How can we rethink our democracy? How can we reshape our democracy? How can we reform our democracy to make sure that it's responsive to folks in a way that it wasn't just a year ago, but in a way that it wasn't 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago? And so, yeah, in chaos, there is opportunity.
Fantastic. At about 9 o'clock this morning, we asked my good friend Elyssa Feder, to my left here, to step up onto this panel. And so in a very real sense,
here I am.
Elyssa knows whereof she speaks when it comes to showing up, Paul. She did, and she agreed, and I thank you. Our original panelist endured 5 canceled flights trying to get here yesterday, and finally at 1 a.m. Gave up. So it was going to be Bobby, but it's her birthday. So Elyssa Feder, many of you know her as a dear friend. In case you don't, she's co-founder and executive director of the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, which was founded in 2016. It brings together, I would say, the authoritative compendium of resources, tools, best practices when it comes to voter registration on campuses. And if I've gotten that wrong, you can correct me.
That's really kind, Brad. Thank you.
But that's my rap when I talk about Elyssa, and I'm immensely grateful for her to step in. So I'm gonna start with an easy one for you.
Great. Oh gosh.
So what does courage look like right now?
That's a great, I mean, courage does look like showing up and getting on stage when you haven't planned to do so in front of a room of incredibly smart, hundreds of incredibly talented, amazing people that you really admire. I mean, I think we have to be real. It is a moment of a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, especially for those of us, and everyone in this room I know works at the intersection of higher education and democracy. We're seeing attacks on both that we haven't seen, at least in many of our lifetimes, or in the time that I've been doing this work in particular. So I think we have to acknowledge that, but also we do have to be brave. We do have to be courageous. And I think that's something that I continuously am asking myself every day, is how am I modeling bravery? As a leader of an organization, a leader of a coalition, working with students, working with folks like you, how are we being brave in this moment? And sometimes that means speaking up when we're not sure if it's okay to do so. Sometimes it means protesting. Sometimes it means just creating space for students and for others. But we all have to figure out ways that we can be brave in this moment and be brave for each other.
Thank you. I want to go deeper, but not yet, into this aspect of your organization's name, the coalition, and what that might mean. But first, David, connect a few of the dots for us that again, we showed up. What should we be paying attention to in the constellation of what's happening, not just in higher ed, but also throughout civil society, national and state level.
Thank you. So yeah, this will be my less optimistic answer, but I think we make a mistake when we don't see what's coming and we don't see the big picture. And I worry, and I don't think this would be true in this room, but I worry that watching the news every day, people see the pieces, but they don't see the bigger picture about what's happening to higher ed. And I think the side attacking higher ed wins when we think of each in a its own bucket and not the whole. And this is not partisan, he's a sitting official. The current vice president said that universities are the enemy and professors are the enemy. And he just said that a couple years ago, and he views Viktor Orban as a role model about what to do with universities. He said that. And so I think we need to start making sure that people see all the aspects of the attacks on universities as part of that same attack. And right now, when we talk about NIH cuts too often, we talk about it as research and cancer, and it's that, but you all know it's an absolute brutal attack on revenue streams for universities. Then there's obviously the attack on DEI. There's Ohio passed a bill 2 days ago on both siding what's taught, and they attack the collective bargaining rights of professors, and they're ignoring students. And then they're attacking, we know, campus speech and protesters. It's all the same. J.D. Vance proposed as a senator going after endowments. It's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. And I worry that we let them sort of piecemeal it, and it gets covered as a piecemeal. It's a brutal assault on the entire operation of independent universities, because as the current vice president said, they can't achieve their goals, just like Orban couldn't, with universities and colleges independent as the way they are today. That's the threat, and it's being played out right now. And the other threat is divide and conquer. That's the other threat. Because in the end, and I have a quote here, you gave me permission I could bring this book up. Uh-oh. In the end, they want, there's one of two paths that they want. One, destroy independent colleges and universities because they are such an obstacle to their sort of less democratic view, small d, of our country, which is what Orban's done. Or even better for them is to convert the resources and the infrastructure of universities to their mission. That's better for them. And so a lot of you probably read this book, Erasing History. Jason Stanley talks about, as we all know, progressive educational movements within liberal democracies have played a critical role for democracy. But then he also says, education, however, does not always serve this purpose. It can also be wielded against democracy and in service of hierarchy. It can be both. And if you don't think Viktor Orban and Vance and others, when they attach conditions to funding, aren't seeking that other path, you're not paying attention. And so I think a really important, we're getting the solutions later, that's the threat. It's a brutal assault. It's all coming at once. It's all from the same broader worry that institutions like yours are bulwarks for democracy, and they either want to just eliminate that obstacle or they want to convert it even worse. And so going forward, my call upon this group, and you're already doing this, you would be here, is there's got to be a broad unity to stand up against it, because the alternative is individual, we're seeing this with the law firms too, right? Individual institutions get pigeonholed, shaken down, they go along with it, and before we know it, their curriculum is being decided by the federal government, and they are all of a sudden, what Jason Stanley just described, is the opposite, and they're part of the problem. And so big picture, once you see all that and you see that strategy of one at a time, create precedents, dominoes start falling, it really calls upon this group and a whole lot of others to band together and say, we will not allow ourselves to become part of this. We will stand up to it. It's not only courageous, it's the only smart response. It's the only thing that works. We have seen for a very long time. You cave to bullies, and they bully more. And so every time a university caves, you think that makes them slow down? No, they'll accelerate. So I think that's the threat. And the specific threat is the sort of picking people off one at a time, as opposed to everyone unifying and saying, nope, none of us are going there. I know it's easy to say that, but that has to be our mindset.
Clarissa, in this context, in this threat, really the threat goes beyond just higher ed into other sectors, as you named, David. But what are students on campuses facing when it comes to organizing themselves?
Yeah, well, again, let's go back to the concept of how much fear is out there right now. I mean, students are being deported for protesting. It's scary, and I do think that too many places in this country sort of abdicate the support for students to do organizing work or to do engagement work in our democracy, either to organizations like ours and let us sort of pick it up and support students where we can and where we can find funding to. But again, I think it goes back to the notion of modeling bravery, standing up for our democracy, and really being there for students right now and in this moment in many different ways. Students also need to be able to adapt their resources in this moment. We all need to be able to adapt our resources in this moment. That's not necessarily something that in higher ed we're really good at doing. We like to do things a specific way within our specific lanes. But we all have to adapt to meet the moment and to really, as Rashawn was saying, make use of this moment and the opportunity that we have to make things better right now. Because I also just keep going back to the thought that it's always the darkest before the dawn. And so how do we utilize this moment in supporting our students and supporting others in advocacy in this moment to create the more just, the more equitable democracy, more successful higher education programs for folks that we know we can do, but we just need to all have the courage to do that right now.
Rashawn, one of the, following up on this, one of the key areas of organizing and pressure is around voting and voting rights, where the space you work in. What are you seeing in this context? What are the threats you're seeing in the context, especially given the recent executive orders around voting?
Well, there are a few things I want to say on that, but I do want to go back to a point you made, David. And, I think one of the important things we have to do in this moment is not just sort of defend universities at this moment, but we also have to think historically about how we got here, right? And if you look at the folks who run this country, whether it's in the White House or whether it's the United States Congress or the governors we have around the country, look at the institutions that they graduated from. Many of those institutions are represented in this room. And so we didn't get here overnight. This country has sort of a unique zeitgeist where our colleges and universities, at least for the past 100 years, have gotten to decide who our nation's leaders are. And as many of you know, for a good chunk of those 100 years, folks who look like me weren't allowed in these institutions. Women weren't allowed in those institutions. And then for the past 20 years, we've had to convince colleges and universities that if you belong to a certain economic class, that you still deserve the right to attend their university and that their university was privileged from having you. And so we ask ourselves how we got to this moment where it seems like we're on the cusp of a plutocracy. And you have to look at the history of American colleges and universities and see where, quite frankly, where we are complicit in our current reality. And so as much as we have to defend and we need to go on offense, we cannot let this moment pass without thinking about exactly how we got here. And so as far as voting rights, I think anybody who is looking at the news can see that voting rights are under assault. But again, this isn't unique. We go back 10 years and we see how the Civil Rights Act has been severed and dismembered piece by piece by piece, just like David was saying. And now we're seeing really sort of the denouement of a lot of that. And so I think a couple of things have to happen, right? There are very incredible organizations, again, some of them represented in this room, that are taking legal action, that are going on offense. But again, part of my job is to take more of a 30,000-foot level. And at the 30,000-foot level, what I can tell you is that we need young people to be more engaged in our democracy, period, full stop. We have millions of young people in this country who are not at all engaged with civic participation, who are not voting, who are not registered to vote, who don't know the 3 branches of government. And so organizations like mine, we focus on voter registration, and I know that's something that a lot of campuses do, but we got to think bigger than that, folks. It's not enough to register students to vote. It's, quite frankly, not even enough to push them to the polls. We have to let young people know that their voices and their presence are not just preferred in our democracy, but required in our democracy. Our democracy is at its best when young people are engaged, and we have far too many young people who are not engaged. And if you look at the history of this country, the most critical moments were moments of young people stepping outside of themselves to demand something different. Phyllis Wheatley was 18 years old when she wrote a book and appeared before George Washington and said, I wrote poetry about what it means to be a black enslaved woman in this country. John Lewis was just out of high school when he started his work. Dr. King was 26 years old when he started the Montgomery bus boycott. This doesn't work if we don't get young people involved, and not just young people who are on your campuses, but young people who are around your campuses. Many of you are at schools that are located in cities and metropolitan institutions. And I know 5 years ago, we all started talking about this concept of anchor institutions, that you all have a responsibility not just to the folks on your campus, but a responsibility to the young people and others who are around your campus. So we got work to do, folks. We got work to do.
Clarissa, follow up on that.
Yeah, I just want to build on that because I think everything that Rashawn has said is so brilliant. But one point I wanted to make is that the work doesn't stop. So Rashawn's organization, the Andrew Goodman Foundation, my organization, the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, and our partners across the coalition, we see a lot of campuses that are participating in our programs every 4 years. And then this is the period where we see a lot of drop-off. We can't just focus on elections and democracy work once every 4 years or once every 2 years. We have to make sure that we are continuously talking to students about the process of our democracy, how to get involved. It doesn't stop. Our organization's work doesn't stop. And after every presidential election, we always get the question, so what do you work on in off years? And I hate that question. There are no off years. I'm proud to say that our organization is about to give out $100,000 in grants to campuses to support them to continue doing voter engagement work in this year, because elections and local elections are so important. I say as I'm sitting next to a former local elected official, but it doesn't stop, and we need your partnership to continue this work every single year, because we're not going anywhere. So we need you all to stick around as well. Yeah.
And if he runs again, you might be between 2 former elected local elected officials. David, keeping in mind Rashawn's point about the complicity that leaders of these institutions have in what we're now facing, and Clarissa's point about the need for continual work that we all share, what would courageous leadership now look like?
I mean, again, and you do this work, so I don't want to speak for what you do, but I just think to this group, and a lot of you will be doing this, but go on offense for democracy where you are. Just go on offense. Like, yeah, we got to defend against what they're doing, and you have to, and there can be some tough decisions, but be an active hub of democracy. And, I wrote about this in my book, not knowing what your organization does, and I'm sure you're doing 10 times what I wrote, but every law school should have a voting rights clinic. Especially I'm hoping the SAVE Act doesn't pass, but the nonstop suppression means more and more people are going to be scared of voting. They're not going to know the rules. They're not going to know how to undo parts of their life that need to be undone to be able to vote without being arrested. I mean, so every law school in this country should have a voting rights clinic that serves not the students, but the community around them. Everyone. It's a no-brainer. And again, this is my simple view of what you do, it's more complicated. Every time students register for classes as a new student or get their university ID, they should be getting the ID to vote if they need one, and they should be registering to vote if they want to. Everywhere. Put it in systematically. And then as Rashawn said, engage after that. That's the front door, but you have to engage all the way through. I do think, again, the SAVE Act, the executive order, we'll see what happens. But one thing I love teaching the history. I may get kicked out of teaching my course soon, by the way. I'm not following any of the new rules that Ohio has passed. I teach all the worst moments of our history so kids know it, okay? Most won't be election lawyers, but I want them to know the history. And one of the most inspiring parts of the Voting Rights Act that gets totally lost is the cases that we all know about. Pre-clearance, Section 5, all of that came later. The first thing they did after the Voting Rights Act passed was send brave federal registrars to the least registered, largely African-American communities of the South and said, we're registering you first, through threats, through everything else. And before the first set of cases even upheld the Voting Rights Act, they had dramatically changed the voting makeup of those southern areas. And they went to the most underrepresented and the most suppressed places. And I worry that if these SAVE Act, if it passes or any of it happens, we are going to, more than we in the past, registration will be the key. That was the front door that unlocked everything else that came after the Voting Rights Act. The first was on-the-ground registration. And that's why when I look at a group of college and university administrators, man, are you sitting on a massive opportunity. And if you're in a city, I'm sitting in Georgia, it's like Ohio, the city populations are the target of all the purging. That's the target. It's not a secret who they're purging. Well, if you're the University of Cincinnati, or you're right here in Atlanta, or you're the mayor of Atlanta, or the mayor of Cincinnati, you are on the front line to protect the constituency you represent that they use tax dollars to purge. So let's get on it. Let's re-register all the purged people who are largely purged because they move and they're poor. Let's figure out how to have every homeless shelter, every JFS office, every medical clinic be a site where people can register. At some point, they're going to try and outlaw all that stuff, right? But until they do, and why do they? Because they know it's effective if we do it. They always outlaw the things that they're scared of. So if you see them threatened by something, use it. Use it. But so I think that we need to have campuses, and this is both courage and just that spirit of history John Lewis talked about. Your communities, especially if you're in an area that's been purged, can be absolute hubs of democracy. Go forward like with gusto, no apologies. This is not partisan activity. Don't ever they want to make it seem like registering is partisan or political. It is not, it is democracy. And that's the core mission all of you have at your schools. It's the core mission all of us have. If they win the battle, and they tried this, they went after Kamala Harris when there was an executive order to allow work study. You probably all remember this, work study to be used to register. They tried to make that seem inappropriate. It is absolutely appropriate and okay for you all, if you follow the rules at least, for you all to register students in the community around. We should all be doing that again. You think John Lewis stopped after elections and took a break for 2 years? No, it's laughable. It happens all the time and it must.
Rashawn, build on that. What does organizing look like now? What can it look like?
Oh, there are so many elements to that. I think, I think we're also in a moment where we need courageous leadership, quite frankly. Not all of this is going to play by the rules. I'm just going to be honest. At some point, we're going to have to stretch ourselves. At some point, we're going to have to be uncomfortable. At some point, we're going to have to do what they call courageous leadership. And quite frankly, I would say we're sort of leading from behind in that sense, because the students that I talk to, they've been demonstrating courageous leadership for the past 18 months. I mean, they're out here speaking truth to power. They're out here making sure that they're involved in the process. And I think us as administrators and us as leaders and us as decision makers need to do the same.
Mika Sifri, in a piece recently, refers to defiance, not resistance, in this moment, as an act. Unpack that for us a little bit. What can defiance mean right now? I didn't tell him I would ask this.
Yeah, I think defiance doesn't necessarily need to be antagonistic. To me, defiance is staying true to who you are. I think someone earlier today talked about core values, and I was listening to some of the awardees, like the work that's being done in Mississippi. I mean, that is what defiance looks like. In this moment, where they don't want us to lean into our ideals of inclusion, our ideals that diversity is valuable, our ideals that this country, as folks have put it, is a beautiful mosaic of different people and cultures. Defiance is leaning into that. At the administrative level, defiance is saying that we are still going to be a place of opportunity and belonging for folks, no matter what you look like or what income bracket you come from. Defiance is begrudgingly figuring out how to make sure that we reach our goals despite whatever obstacle they put in front of us. And so, yeah, I think, it just has to be, you put it, we go with gusto. That is what defiance looks like at this moment.
David earlier called for unity in the sector, and I'm going to unfairly turn this then to Clarissa to answer this. What would unity look like across the sector?
Yeah, it's definitely a moment of solidarity and community and networks. We need each other in this moment, and as a coalition, we have tried to show that solidarity for our partners, whether that be other nonprofits or higher education institutions for each of you. I think part of that also means coming to spaces like this one and connecting with others and learning from others, because I think one tendency that many of us could have is to sort of draw back in this moment, and also just, I sometimes the fear, the anxiety kind of takes over me, and I feel like I personally have to have all the answers. I don't have to have all the answers. But if I'm in a network and in a community with folks like all of you, there is collectively a lot of bravery and a lot of intelligence and a lot of strength in this room. That's one of the things that we try to build and create for people through the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. And we do that by helping to provide strategic direction and providing connections and resources and funding, as I mentioned. And I loved so many of the things that you brought up because we have so many resources. You want to learn how to create a federal work study position on your campus that integrates voter registration? We have a toolkit for that we created with our partners at the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge and the Campus Vote Project. You want to integrate voter registration into your orientation processes or your class registration processes, we have resources for that. And they're not ones that we necessarily created, but that were created by folks in our network. We have an incredible resource on how to engage faculty in this work that was created by my friend Josh Young at Miami-Dade College. That's in our Ask Every Student toolkit, alongside resources from 30 other campus partners who have been doing this work and figured out how to fit this work into the context of their own institutions, because there's also no silver bullet. There's no one way to do this type of work on all of the campuses in the country because all of them are unique. And so I think part of it is finding the communities where you can find the resources, the connections, the strength that you need, and taking the information and knowledge from those spaces and utilizing them in your own context right now.
Please do, Rashawn.
I think, for me, and if you're an executive director of a nonprofit, this becomes 60% of your job. But unity looks like also philanthropy stepping up. I mean, if we're looking historically at the civil rights movement, one of the main sub-themes that doesn't often get told is that the civil rights movement was really an economic battle, right? So white Southerners, what they were doing is they were colluding with banks, and banks were calling folks mortgages who signed up for the NAACP. And at the same time, you have folks like Harry Belafonte and Dick Gregory flying planes into the South and dropping off bags of cash to pay folks' bails. You had foundations funding the Highlander School where Rosa Parks and Septima Clark were being trained. And so the dollars were flowing, and it was absolutely an economic battle that the right side won. And the same needs to be true here. The interesting thing about the state of democracy right now and organizations that do democracy work is that 1% of all philanthropic dollars go to democracy working organizations. That's a problem. That is a problem. Nothing else matters if our democracy crumbles. And so a part of unity, at least as far as I'm concerned, is the folks who are well-resourced, and who have benefited economically also have an obligation to pour in to help us. Organizations like ours, I can't speak for you, Clarissa, but I spend hours on the phone every day begging for money, asking for folks to make donations so that we can then go to students and say, here's $2,000 for you to do some important work in your community this year. And that flow needs to get a lot better. What's the highest and best use of our time right now? And I don't know that it's being on the phone with 100 foundations asking them to fund us every year. Foundations instinctually at this moment should be saying, how can we support the work that you are doing? And the same thing is with colleges and universities. And I know this is a bit provocative to say, but I mean, we have colleges and universities sitting on endowments that are the size of small nations. If we aren't going to employ that at this moment, what was the entire purpose of money? Listen, I believe, I grew up in a school of thought that was taught that money is a tool. If we aren't using it as a tool, then it's worthless. So what is the point of building these endowments of billions of dollars if at the most critical moment in our country, we aren't deploying those dollars to lean into our values? And that's a question that we have to ask as a space.
Rashawn, I want to recognize the courage it took you to say that with me sitting right here, a funder. And I actually don't mean that at all glibly. That is a model of courage. David, what does unity look like to you now?
I mean, way beyond, I mean, it's obviously far beyond the higher ed. I mean, I think it means people kind of, it's easy to say this, I know, but it's watching, there are two paths. One is what we're seeing, you see a couple law firms cave and you see others stand up. It's playing that out. Which is going to work? It's caving one at a time. That's just a losing path. My son he's 8, he would get that. But we've seen it all play out for years, that kind of caving gets you hungry. Not eating, but the country. And that's true of universities. It's just so clear. And once you see it, the unity is to say, we're not going there. We're going to stand together. And the one other thing, and again, we're up here talking, you're running these places, so it's easy to say it. Unity means getting all aspects of your schools on board. The country, I drove my sons down to the Tennessee game in Rupp Arena the other day, and I see Kentucky and Tennessee fans with their shirts on arguing about their teams. They love their teams. Buckeyes are loved. These places are people love these places. And at the very moment we're showing up watching Final Four and all that, the very places we're all cheering for are being absolutely brutally assaulted. Why aren't we taking the most popular aspects of these schools and getting them in the fight? Coaches and players and others saying, if you destroy this part of our school, we're not going to have the part you love either. That's unity. And I think that's the kind of conversation that anyone leading the school, because again, what is the point of any of this if we have a bunch of sports teams with nothing else, right? So unity is, and we were talking about this earlier, that's leverage, folks. Take the parts of the schools, we all know the value of every aspect, but the people who are saving people from cancer, that's a major leverage point. This is the former politician to me talking. That's a major leverage point. The teams that people love. I mean, if you destroy the NIH funding to the University of Alabama, you're crushing the place. So why are we not hearing that from all the people involved in the university? We should. And so unity, I think, is all of us, but it's also within each school, and I know this is easier said than done, getting all aspects of that school together to start fighting back and using the highest leverage points possible is maybe the most high-profile part of that pushback.
David Pepper, Clarissa Unger, Rashawn Davis, thank you for being here. Thank you for having us.